Mark Schofield. Mark Schofield of Patriots fan. He actually has a video out today. He does a series where he analyzes 3 passes from every single game. And it's fitting because the Patriots only threw 3 passes, so he only has 3 to dissect. But he got me thinking. Last year, Mark Schofield, he recorded a podcast in the aftermath of their Monday Night Football loss to the Bills called Eat at Arby's. And in it, he quoted Nihilist Arby's on Twitter, which is a great follow. I'd suggest to anybody out there, if you're feeling empty like I am today, just take a peek at that. Because some of their tweets really do put things in perspective for me today. I mean, there's dozens of them to pick from, but the one that hit the nail on the head was, the world will end, you'll die, so will everyone you've ever known. Why do you care about what's bumming you out right now? Nothing matters. Please continue to eat at Arby's. I'm finished, Chris. I got nothing left to say. I'm all beat up out here. So I'm going to turn the wheel over to our very first in-studio guest.
Ooh, wow.
Mr. Nathan P. Geary from WGR 550. I'm going to turn this over to you because I want your final thoughts as I sit here and enjoy an Arby's sandwich. This is where we've reached, Chris. I have nothing left. I'm Mark Smith. It's
a day-old Arby's. I don't know what
you're... It's a day-old Arby's?
Yeah, it's yesterday. So what are your final thoughts?
You have sauce in your pocket. Well, this is clearly rock bottom. I didn't know I was coming to save a life tonight, but here I am. I had to pull this guy out of the grave. Well, listen. A lot of frustration. You're eating that sandwich. Yeah, okay. Love that about you. That's... If you can say one thing about him is this the consistency, just of absolute debauchery and just, yeah. But I just absolutely respect the hell out of it. But I think...
You've been out here waging war on the Twitter streets today, sir.
There's so much unfortunate blame to be sort of tossed around over the last 24 hours. I've gone through the cycles of, yeah, maybe it's the offense. No, it's definitely the defense. And, well, maybe the way that they did that really means this. And that's what you do in this game is you dissect the intersection of where storylines and things you can claw and you can attach to, right? And mostly I think everyone's looking for something else to talk about than the Patriots sort of recapturing this thing that felt like was over, and now you sit in a place where not only is it not over, but you're sort of watching it replay again. And I think the anxiety comes from a real fear of a real fear of thinking that 2020 was a fluke. And there's that real fear that exists currently. It probably is pretty palpable in this room. But what does, at the end of the day, that game mean in the grand scheme of things? And I think the perspective is super important on this because the Bills have another opportunity in Foxborough to go beat that team. They have an opportunity to beat Tom Brady this week. And I think those are important things that, like, hey, they're 7-5. The season's probably over, but and listen, the reason I say that is because I just don't know what they have done to prove that they can be trusted to dig themselves out of the hole. They haven't won back-to-back games since late September. They are 3-4 in their last 7 games after starting 4-1. Their average points per game offensively are down 13 points over the first 6 weeks of the season. This Bills offense averaged 35 points a game, and over the last 6 weeks, they have averaged 22 points per game. Their defense has pretty much throughout given up about 14 points pretty solidly throughout the season. Obviously, you give up a whole bunch against the Colts a couple weeks ago. That skews away a couple of those bullshit, shutouts against, teams that basically shouldn't be in the league. They should be relegated. That is just repulsive, folks. But where I want to go with this is the coach has become something that I'm sure all of us probably in the back of our mind feared, which is a conservative by nature, defensive-minded coach. I don't know inside the building. I know where you stand on Brian Dable. I know where you stood on Brian Dable before the season started. And then, listen, I've got a real feeling here. And to be clear, I don't have insider knowledge. I don't have an inside scoop. I don't have somebody telling me this information. I get the sense that Brian Dable wanted to throw the football 1 million times this year. And he came out in week 1, and they got punched in the face, and it didn't really work, and they weren't prepared for the too high safety shell to really stifle them. And then Josh Allen got hit a few times in that game, and boom, there you are. You're 0-1 against the Steelers team a lot of people thought you should have beat. And I think what happened is I think Sean McDermott on Monday morning went down to Brian Dable's office and said, you got to run the football. We got to establish the run. We have to be a physical football team. The problem is they're not built that way. And the problem is that the issues on this roster are the exact same ones that held them back in the AFC Championship game just a year ago. They looked at the offense, and this is why part of me believes that Brian Dable has sort of been the fall guy for what I think is a really troubling trend of an inability to scout offensive linemen, to understand where it is so critical to have proven depth. The cornerback position, they're learning the hard way. If Dane Jackson goes down with an ankle injury, they don't have another true outside corner on the roster right now.
No.
So these are fundamental, foundational issues with the organization that you may not have looked at, or you thought you looked at last year or had given enough credit to, but you assumed the quarterback would be able to cover all of that up. And the problem is they are not, in my opinion, leaning into Josh Allen enough. I think he accounts for roughly 76% of his team's offense, which was in first place amongst active quarterbacks in the league, right ahead of Lamar Jackson, who, by the way, you would think has 100% of his team's offense. Yes. And Josh Allen has more.
Wow.
And on Monday night, in a game where you turned around and you handed the ball off to Zach Moss and Devin Singletary repeatedly with the same result over and over and over again, they say that there were 3 designed quarterback runs called in that game. You have to point those out to me. I don't remember them.
Being there watching it live, it didn't feel like it.
First and goal from the 6, and you end up with a missed 33-yard field goal attempt into a. If you're Sean McDermott, I know that the wind had died down, but it's not like it went from 70 miles per hour to nothing. It was still 30, 40 mile per hour wind gusts.
You have a quarterback who's 6'5", who runs like a gazelle, and from 6 yards, you can't find a way into the end zone. No, these are all valid points.
I think the offensive coordinator has been given explicit instructions to keep their quarterback out of harm's way and to run the football in a conventional sense.
See, now this takes me back, though, to 2017, because I don't know what Sean McDermott's involvement in the offense has been, and I've had some conversations with some people.
I don't think it's a lot, but I think it's enough. I think there's one thing that this is revolving around, and it's the identity that he wants. And it's this physical identity. But the problem is they're a finesse team. And they were built purposefully to beat the Chiefs. And what they're realizing is other teams have caught up to the Chiefs. The Bills were late.
Yeah.
The Bills decided that they were going to build up to stop an animal that everyone had already figured out, but you were late to the party.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Super Bowl wasn't just about Mahomes' injury or the offensive line. It's that they had gotten figured out.
That style of football was done.
And it's not that it's done, because they're going to punch back. They're going to figure. They're too talented.
For sure.
And Andy Reid is too creative.
Because they have a creative guy.
That's right.
And so that's when you come back to the Buffalo Bills. Like, Chris, weren't we just talking about this? Literally, you come back and you have an offensive coordinator who's nowhere near as creative as Andy Reid. You have a coach who, when I go back to 2017 and I talk to people about this, when Justin Yulberg, we're talking about this last night, and he's talking about McDermott being to blame for this. And I go, well, I don't know how much he actually does when it comes to the offense. But here's what I know happened back in 2017. We weren't doing well. And Sean McDermott said, hey, we need to pass the ball better. You have that Broncos game where somehow 3 wide receivers end up in the same 3-yard box. And he goes to Dennison and goes, guys, we have to get this passing game going because LaShawn McCoy can't run the offense himself. And all of a sudden, Nathan Peterman's your quarterback. And you say, wow, that was a dramatic shift. You benched your starter. That seems crazy. I wonder what spurned that. Well, in the moment, you want to say, well, he was given information from his staff that said this is what's necessary. Now you look at this through the lens you're providing and you say, look, maybe he went to them and said, I want this. And Rick Dennison said, well, then if that's the case, you need to give me another quarterback than Tyrod to run my passing concepts.
Yeah, right.
And then they gave him that guy, and it went up in flames.
Yeah, very quickly.
And that's why he got fired, was because he said, hey, you led me astray. The thing that I wanted to do, you gave me a roadmap for it, and it blew up in my face.
Yeah.
Could this not be a similar set of circumstances where he goes to him and says, hey, we're good. I want to be a tough physical team that doesn't expose my quarterback to a ton of contact, that wants to be physical, and all of the buzzwords you want to throw at this thing. Maybe that's where this lays, is that McDermott's the guy who just walks into an office and pulls a Steve Jobs, like I like to call it. And everybody loves the idea of, Chris, you and I hate Apple products.
Correct.
Nate, you're a millennial. You like Apple.
I am young.
Do you have an iPhone?
I do.
Absolutely.
I am young.
I knew you did.
I've got the blue text when you text me. You got that.
So this is the thing. I always look at Steve Jobs as the guy who just kind of, and Bill Burr has a hilarious bit about this, and he's right. Steve Jobs, not a dumb guy. He was brilliant, but also he's the guy who walked into a room full of other nerds and just said, "Hey, I want this thing. Get it done," and walked out of the room. Now, luckily, Steve Jobs had a lot of smart guys behind him who helped power his ideas into reality. The Buffalo Bills do not. And it's not coming to fruition, but it seems to be something that the Buffalo Bills want. I don't know who they are anymore. I think that's why I'm sitting here eating an Arby's roast beef sandwich.
That's a day old.
Shoving it down my, literally.
Gullet.
Just shoving it down.
The gullet.
Because yesterday when I took a bite of it, I felt nothing. I wanted to hate it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm here in the same place with this football team today. I don't hate it, but I don't enjoy it. I don't know what it is. And I'm numb. So if there's any advice you could give a fan like me who's suffering, going, I don't know who to blame for this. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know what this turns into. What would it be, Nate?
Again, I think it would be the fact that they're going to have an opportunity to beat Tom Brady next week. And they already sort of have beaten Bill Belichick. It felt a little fluky yesterday. I said this, I went back and looked from last year. And in one-score games in 2020, the Bills were 5-1 in one-score games. They're 0-4 in one-score games this year. So
is that natural correction then?
I probably, but I also think that a little of that is kind of predictable. And I think if you're Vegas, if you're odds setters, what you do is you look at an upcoming season, try to set your odds. One of the first things they do is say, okay, which team is the most likely to regress and which team is the most likely to ascend in a given season? And the first thing they do is they look, okay, what was their record in one-score games last season? And if you are a 12 or 13-win football team and you win 6, 7 one-score games and you get lucky a whole bunch, I think you look at the Baltimore Ravens in this, where they're paper tigers, where they won on a 66-yard field goal against the worst team in football. They probably should have lost against the Raiders. They probably should have lost against a lot of they definitely should have lost against the Raiders.
The Colts?
Or they did lose against the Raiders. They should have lost against the Colts. That's what I was thinking. So what this comes down to is they're going to have an opportunity to beat this upcoming week Tom Brady. That will sort of, I think, reset things, recalibrate things. You get to 8 wins. You're at 8-5. And you have a Panthers team at home that you should Denver Bronco, that you should get back on the right track, throw 45 up on the board against a team that's not playing for anything. They've been up and down, so they're a quality opponent. Go out there and assert yourself and show that you can win back-to-back games and do that, convincingly and get yourself back on track. And then you have the opportunities to go into that New England game coming off of 2 straight wins. I would be willing to bet you that the Indianapolis Colts beat the Patriots after their bye week. I don't.
The Colts are hot.
Do you know who has a ton of one-score wins?
Who?
The the New England Patriots.
Yeah.
Do you know who they have won? Do you know who they've beaten? They beat the Bills, but in
the Falcons, the Titans without Henry, in
Bills
a game
have-
that was sloppy
the
as
Houston
hell.
Texans forced Bill Belichick to fundamentally change his secondary and what they do schematically. They went from a 80 to 90% man team to an 80 to 90% zone team because Davis Mills ripped their defense apart. So they're winning football games, and no matter what you say, that is what matters in this league. That's what Sean McDermott will tell you. And this team, here's the thing I agree with McDermott, and this is why he almost told on himself a little, is if you would have told me before the game at 7:45 that the Bills would have 4 red zone opportunities, the Patriots would have 1, I would have told you that the Bills would have won by 2 or 3 scores.